Welcome to Authors at Drucker. I'm Dave Specht, Senior Fellow at the Global Family Business Institute at the Drucker School of Management. At the Drucker School, we aspire to become the global meeting place for the world's most influential business-owning families. Today's conversation represents our progress towards achieving that goal. Authors at Drucker is an interview series where we feature top authors that write about issues impacting business-owning families. Authors at Drucker is made possible from the generous sponsorship of the James E. Hughes Jr. Foundation. The foundation is dedicated to advancing the study of family governance and generational well-being. We at the Drucker School feel very aligned and very grateful to Jay and his foundation. On the last Authors at Drucker, we featured Scott Zaslow and his book, Building a Sustainable Family Office, an insider's guide to what works and what doesn't. If you missed that interview, please check out our YouTube channel for the replay. Without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our guests for today. Today, we're joined by Wendy Sage-Hayward and Barb Dartt. Wendy is a senior consultant at the Family Business Consulting Group, working closely with business leaders, family firms, and boards. And Barb is a principal consultant at the Family Business Consulting Group, and she assists family enterprises in tackling succession, management transitions, and putting appropriate family governance structures in place. That's like the most simple bio I could possibly provide, just to preserve time so that they could hear from you and not me read a bio. So Wendy and Barb, thanks so much for joining me today on Authors at Drucker.
Nice to be here with you.
Thanks,
So today we're going to be featuring your book, Own It, which, the concept of ownership is not something that is really taught in business school, which is maybe one of the biggest misses in the world. And so I feel like your contribution to the world is to provide that context for ownership. And I really appreciated the layout of the book in terms of life stages, because it made it very practical. So thanks for living at the intersection of the academic and practical world. Wendy, perhaps we can begin with you. The book is about developing an ownership mindset. How did you come to the realization that this topic was worthy of the work of developing an entire book around the topic?
Well, Dave, it was a very personal journey. So my grandmother passed away in the mid-90s on Christmas Day. My dad passed away 3 months later. And there was never succession to my dad's generation. And so my sisters and my mother and I all initially we became beneficial owners in a long-standing, last man standing trust. And there was no onboarding, there was no education, there was trial by fire, so to speak. And it took us a long time to really understand what it meant to be a beneficial owner. And then, of course, it was a last man standing trust. So when he passed away, Robert Tilney passed away, we became partners and really trying to understand what it meant to be an owner, especially when you're not an operator.
Yeah.
And so, these two things are ownership and leadership are thought of in the senior generation and usually the founding generation as the same thing. But as you go down in the generations, they become very different things. And trying to understand as an owner, where do you have a voice? Where does decision making matter, and how do you participate that in a meaningful way? And what kind of ownership is there besides operating ownership? And there's a, we didn't start that conversation. That was started long before Barb and I got involved, but really thinking about that and understanding what ownership meant. And then, even as I own my own business, I say to this to our general manager all the time, that he's not a family member, but he really has an owner's mindset. He cares deeply, and he will do the things like mowing the grass when we're opening the bistro, or picking up garbage as you're walking over to the washroom. And there's a level of care and intention and stewardship that you feel as an owner. And it doesn't just necessarily naturally happen. It needs to be cultivated. And I think Barb and Gaia and I felt like it would be great to be able to cultivate that from the very early stages, even though one of the key messages in our book is education without expectation. So not that when they're little, you're trying to pressure them to think that they have to own this business in the future, but you're really helping them build those skills, because the chances are if they don't own your business, given the number of family businesses in the world, it's up to 90% in most economies around the world, they're likely going to own something themselves, their own business. So cultivating that at an early age and all the way through life makes sense.
I appreciate the backstory. I mean, the fact that you personalized it. In my own journey, I would say what was caught instead of taught was not an ownership mindset. It was a laborer mindset. And I've talked about this in the past, but my grandmother, she was a laborer in the fields, and she would take my father with her when he was really little, and that's what she remembered.
Yeah.
His dad was sick and wasn't able to work, and so that's what he remembers. And fast forward, he's a grown man, and he's a great salesman. And I asked him one day, I would think I was 14 years old. I said, Dad, why do you make all this money for this business owner? Why don't you just own a business?
Yeah.
Well, Wendy, what had been modeled was not an ownership mindset. It was a work hard, give an honest day's labor, and the owner will pay you. And so I think that is an interesting concept of, we're going to teach them one thing or the other.
Yeah, right.
And if you want them to be owners, you want them to take ownership of their own future, you have to be really explicit, even if they grow up around someone that is an owner. Barb, I put you on mute, but anything to add to that specifically?
I would, mine came from a slightly different place, and I'll just share it briefly because I think it flows into my point here. I came from agriculture, which is a very capital intense business.
Yeah.
There's no way the next generation generally can afford to buy it from the prior generation. You can't do that every generation and grow a sustainably sized business. And in ag particularly, we've had this owner operator mindset that says if you don't live here and work here, you're not really in quote involved. People like that word. Are you involved in your family business? It's got it, it doesn't apply to management, labor, like we're not specifying anything. And I saw lots of really capable potential owners have an emotional connection to a business, a lot of passion for an industry, a lot of care and stewardship, be really denied the opportunity because they chose to go get a degree and move somewhere else. And it, to me, as I was seeing the potential of an owner role, it felt like, man, it doesn't work for everyone. But why wouldn't we maintain these non-operating owners? It's patient capital. We don't have to buy it back. We have a lot of energy and talent that can be applied. And as we say in the book, I mean, and again, as Wendy alluded to, there's been lots of good writing in FBCG on ownership for some time. I mean, Craig and John and Steve McClure have a book that came long before us that I share with a lot of clients because it's really accessible and small. But the purpose that comes with being an owner can be a very fulfilling role for people to have. And to Wendy's point, supplement maybe a W-2 type role elsewhere in your life, whether you're 3 states away or you have some artistic career that maybe doesn't look much like a business focus. That owner role felt accessed and a real miss in terms of attracting and retaining not just the financial side, not just the capital, but the energy and passion and purpose and care. And it felt like we were cutting people off unnecessarily. And so that's what really drove me to start looking into this and trying to help people see earlier. Look, we can grow these owners without expectation, but if we teach them the right skills, then maybe we aren't so worried about having a set of non-operating owners in the system if we start really early.
Well, I think in ag, non-operating owners are the enemy in most farmers' eyes. And so I think there's a lot of education that needs to happen around what does a healthy non-operator owner relationship look like. And as long as there's structures and there's realistic expectations for cash flows and how you get in and get out of the business or the farm, it can work. But I think where it doesn't work is where there's not structure, where there's not communication, where there's mismatched expectations. And ag needs a lot of help with that for sure.
Well, and it's really any capital intense kind of industry. Manufacturing's in the same place. That just it's such a large investment to try and transfer that without some of that patient capital becomes really challenging. But I think the view of the enemy, I mean, it takes a lot of work to create the lanes so that people
Yeah.
understand. But when you have those non-operating owners that contribute, it is a beautiful thing, and it's really powerful to see that energy applied. But I also think they're not wrong, those operating owners. There is a tremendous amount of power authority vested in the owner role. That is where it all lies. And if we only focus on that to the exclusion of the family voice and influence, then we're just not destined for a very long serving standing business anyway.
Yeah.
It's going to have to, move towards fulfilling the family's values and, meeting their needs and influence if we're really going to have a long time.
And Wendy, I think you wanted to add something.
Yeah, I did. The other piece that I think is so important about ownership, especially when we think about the family and the business, if you would think about that three circle, ownership has really not been talked a lot about in the field. It has to some degree, as we've already alluded to, but this notion of the complexity in the ownership circle. So if you think about the shareholders agreements and trusts and dividends and distributions, and the language is not risk management. It's not our everyday language. And so growing up in a family business, we don't really understand all of those things. And we tend to abdicate some of them, some of those responsibilities to our advisors, because you look at a shareholders agreement, you read a paragraph or a sentence in the shareholders agreement, it's a paragraph, right? And to try to understand it and what it means to you as an owner, there's such important aspects of ownership, and yet we don't have, again, good training. We don't even think about necessarily having ownership meetings or ownership and future ownership meetings. We often talk about boards and we talk about family councils, but a lot of times people are not talking about the ownership governance that needs to happen around all of these topics that are really complex components of being an owner. So we need to educate and create that capability in our family members too, who are going to be owners.
Yeah.
And Dave, to that end, I just want to say thanks for recognizing that we attempted to put the book at the intersection between academic theories and practical application. And what Wendy just described was exactly it. I mean, it took us a long time, and it's really complicated to simplify and describe ownership, all of the technical and other aspects. But then you've got to try and apply it. So we tried to get through that complexity in the first chapter, excuse me, and then help you understand how to apply it in the future chapters.
Yeah. The book takes a really practical approach to breaking down ownership mindset into different kind of age categories and life stages. And in the book, you use some fictional characters, Zach and Zoe, to teach age-appropriate ideas for developing that ownership mindset. Barb, would you talk about just that first stage from birth to 12 years old? What can a young person experience in that time to help develop an ownership mindset?
Yeah, I'd say I put it in two buckets for our conversation today. We've grouped it a little bit differently in the book, but I'd say one is the experience with the business as a parent or an individual is responsible for educating that age group. Think about, what kind of emotional ties and connections are we creating at that time? So an affinity, hopefully, and then some very basic skills that are the foundational building blocks and of some of these more technical needs later on. So be mindful of the experience, your language at the dinner table about the business, the reception young people get when they attend the business with you, the way you treat, do you treat the employees, no matter where they're at, with respect and honor equally as you introduce your child? Do you ask them to learn how to do a handshake? I mean, there's so many rich opportunities as you let those young folks interact with the business. And all of those who work in a family business and those of us who worked with them, like, we all know those childhood experiences are so informative and kind of shaping to our adult life. So just recognizing that you are creating those meaningful historical, maybe even subliminal associations with what the business means in our family. That's one piece. And then the other piece is, as a toddler can say mine, they kind of get ownership. and what is the responsibility that's associated with having something that you care for, a toy or an animal? I mean, we've got the opportunity to talk about respect and stewardship of those items, earning it back if you mistreat it, or earning enough to buy something that's meaningful to you. Some of the basics of how we treat money, what that means to us, that has a huge impact on how we interact with a business or ownership in the future. And then the last part I'd say around those basic building blocks is in the enterprises that we work with, and that this book generally applies to, you are not a sole owner, you are a member of a team. And so thinking about how we treat anybody that we've got to collaborate with, because you'll be in a co-owner or partnership role with other family members, and being a good team member is really a fundamental piece of being a strong, effective owner.
Well, I want to just pull in a couple threads there. One is the language that we use matters. So if you're a business owner and you're around your kids, is this my business or our business? Like little things like that matter. I think about the most important person, and this is my opinion, the most important person to influence the transition process or how the rising generation feels about the business might not be the owner operator. It might be the spouse that may not be every day in the business. And I think that group plays an incredibly important role with how the rising generation feels about the business, how the business is talked about, like you said, at the dinner table, or, is the business a competing interest for all of us, or is the business a stewardship to the community or whatever. So I do think, Barb, you brought it up, the words that we use really matter. And so I appreciate that.
And Dave, I'll just say that's really hard in the early generations, because I think being a family enterprise owner sneaks up on people. That is not what a lot of entrepreneurs intended to build. They had a dream and built a business, and it was their dream. And as that language, as you grow, that is about risk and sacrifice and commitment. And, that often the idea that, in 2 generations is going to be owned by a set of cousins, like that's so far from people's minds. So I think it's not that it's some easily overlooked thing that you can just pick up off the ground and do. I think we're just not in that space. And really, that's why mindset was the language we used in the book. It really is a mindset. It's multifactorial. It takes a lot to build, and it's not easy because it's got all these different factors.
Well, I think of another simple factor that I see walking around our little community of 2,500, and it's like company swag. Do you see a 4-year-old or a fourth grader wearing their company's brand to school on their hat or on their shirt? Like those are real messages that come home and it live in the little heart of that young man or young woman that says, I'm connected to something bigger than me. And again, I think these are little things, but they can be really big. Wendy, any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's such an interesting point, because you're right. That is an expression of sort of their connection to something that is bigger than them. And it also can have some challenges associated with it, because they're seen as being part of this, ideal wealthy family or big, sort of family in town. Even if it's not a huge amount of wealth, it's still that they're associated with something that sometimes they get. I've had the rising generation sort of also feel a lot of pressure around that. And like I have a young man who was 12 at the time, and he was getting pressure from his friends about he was part of an auto group. Hey, is your dad going to get me a deal? And, a lot of pressure. And he actually was crying at a meeting, like tears were flowing, because he wasn't sure how to help, how to respond to this in a way that was, felt effective for him. And so I think part of the development process is to help illuminate those challenges that they might be experiencing, and also give them the skillfulness to how to respond in a way that makes them feel strong and confident and not, sort of confused, right? I have another young man, 17, working for his family business, and he was called, we'll just say Mr. B, with his last name, Mr. whatever his last name was, right? And he just felt by his boss, and he's 17 years old. And I think sometimes employees, there's a couple of things they can feel nervous and scared. About how to, sort of treat this family member. Sometimes, they're starstruck a little bit. And so again, helping this young man be able to respond in a way that left him feeling confident and strong in his relationship, but also sent a message to this employee to saying, hey, I don't want you to treat me that way. I want you to give me good feedback. His cousin said to me, I had to go outside of the family business to get real feedback. So it's also development, not just of the family members, but it's also of the managers and employees who they work with. Because you're only here because your last name is so-and-so, right?
Yeah.
So they get these messages that are really hard for them sometimes to handle. And so building that capability and confidence in them to be able to respond effectively.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of assuming the pressure is coming, whether we like it or not. So I would love to see more development done in giving the rising generation language, like taking them through scenarios. You're going to go to dinner, you're going to go to lunch, and you're going to have friends assume you're going to pick up the bill because your parents have a big business.
Right.
How do you respond to that? What is the language that you're going to use? Because when you're in the situation, it's too late.
It is too late. That's right. Exactly.
And you're going to feel however you're going to feel. But, whether it's parents listening to this or advisors to family companies, that rising generation needs language. They need practice.
They do.
And it's not intuitive for how to navigate those situations. And so we should not assume that they will know how to do it.
No, in fact, I would say assume that they don't know how. Exactly. Yeah.
That's a better assumption.
If you think about the message that being that intentional about modeling that interaction for folks, like that tells a next gen, okay, this is a distinct role. There are skills that go with it. It's not easy. Other people won't understand it. And we think about it deliberately here. Like embedded in even just making space for the conversation is so much of a message of importance and value, and opens the door to those next gens to ask questions about other things they run into. When you just leave a little bit of space for that, like the reward is so rich.
Yeah, it really is.
And it communicates that the rising generation is important, whether they're connected to the business or not. And for a parent or an advisor to the parent, to take that time with them and to give them some skills and some tools and some practice, it elevates them and it helps them to feel like, well, this must matter. I must matter.
Right. Exactly. It's important.
Yeah, for sure. Wendy, let's jump to the next kind of life stage, the adolescent stage. In the book, you call it like 10 to 20. There are a lot of parents listening to this call and they're looking for the silver bullet to work with those adolescents. I know you don't have a silver bullet and would never promise one, but what are some of the important considerations for folks in the adolescent stage, again, like 10 to 20?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. There aren't silver bullets. It's more like a stage where you're planting the seeds is probably the sort of analogy you might use. And, things like framing money as a tool rather than a score, and making your own decisions around spending and business-wise visible to your children. So having conversations with them at that stage, trusting them enough that you are sharing with them how you are making decisions around.
This is a tough one, Wendy.
Yeah.
Because there are a lot of founders that feel like I risked all.
Yes.
And now that we have something, I feel should I use the word? I feel entitled to be able to spend my money however I want. Exactly. But the conversation happens is, yes, you can.
Right.
But you also can't choose how your children are going to view that, or what expectations they're going to inherit with how you spend. So It's a tricky one for
It is
sure.
absolutely, and we also have a cultural value of generosity. If you have, you should be sharing that, right? So I think it is a dilemma, and knowing setting some boundaries around that, so that kids understand it's just not a free flow when you're making decisions that are just without any base in value or a base in things that you think are important in life. And I agree with you. It is a dilemma. And I think even sharing that, Dave, you can even talk about, hey, we have this money and here's where we're spending it. And we're also going to involve them in philanthropy. So we're also giving and we're building our community and causes that are important and getting the kids involved in, hey, it's not just about us and us spending money,
Yeah.
but it's also about giving back to our community, or even talking about how you're compensating employees. Again, you don't have to give numbers, but you can talk about how you are basing that decision with your employees in terms of, what it's generating for the business, what versus what you're trying to do with your employees and helping all boats rise, not just your boat rise, I think is important. I think also giving them tangible, real experiences. So, in working in the business or elsewhere and helping them really appreciate the financial side of that or the experiential side of that and what they're learning and trying, again, it's trying to make things more explicit rather than intangible. I think the other piece I want to talk about is um, helping them be involved in some of the decision making. It's not just the parents, as they're starting into that adult, understanding that they are at that stage where identity formation is a big deal.
Yeah.
And sort of what we've been talking about already, which is they matter and their voice matters and their ideas matter, and getting them involved in projects that are important, like philanthropy, having them maybe take on, I've got one Gen 3 group where they get $10,000 and collectively they are choosing the charity that they want to donate that to. And they're not just donating it. So it's not just about money, but it's also about investing time. But having to think through what's important to us as a cause, why is that important? How can we actually help them, not just about giving money, but what do we want to do for that particular organization? Do we want to, buy a particular MRI machine, or do we want to do something else in terms of how we're investing our money with them, and then following up and being involved in that? So there's lots of different, I think, aspects of adolescence. It's also really difficult because, as we know, as parents, we become really stupid at that stage in their eyes. We know
They
nothing.
become really smart.
Yeah, they become really smart. And but respecting that and not feeling like you have to challenge every component, but again, involving them in places that are important. Um, I think the other piece that I would say is that it's not just about them individually, but it's also building their relationships with their cousins, other or their siblings, in terms of understanding the difference of taking your family hat off and putting your business or your ownership hat on. And that really building that capability, because it's a completely different way of being with your family member, and coming to the table with those behaviors that are more professional than treating them like your brother, your sister, your mom or dad. And that can be as simple as, don't call me mom and dad at work, right?
Sure.
It can
Yeah.
be use my name. Yeah.
What one of the keys that I see with this adolescent phase is the connection to story, so their past. I think this is a crucial time for them to learn about who am I and who were my parents and my grandparents and my great grandparents. If there's an immigration story, I think for them to know that. If there's, the origin of the business, the near death business experiences that the family has faced, it's a perfect time to teach those things so that they can have kind of proper context around, okay, we're in a different place right now. We weren't always here. And this was the story. And so my favorite thing is to assign them the project of learning those things and then presenting their family history or presenting the corporate history at a family meeting coming from their mouth.
Mhm.
It is something that has been kind of magical to see.
Absolutely. It's a great learning experience for them.
Yeah, for sure.
Mhm.
Barb, let's go to the next stage. So as we work with multi-generational families, I feel like the challenges of navigating these life stages, the questions of like risk temperament, educational interest, and other developing interests. As you think about putting together a family meeting with three generations in the room, that can be really hard to figure out, okay, what topics should we talk about, because the rising generation is interested in this and they can handle this, but the senior generation, is at a very different life stage. As you think about like family meetings and family assemblies and family gatherings, how do you navigate those generational differences in their interests?
Yeah, I think the diversity in the room and the real the range of knowledge, particularly about financials, and then the attention span is certainly got to be considered. I think the most important thing to do is never underestimate the amount of prep that you should put into designing a great agenda and a great flow of topics, as well as a great mix of fun and education. And those are going to overlap. You can do both, what I call guerrilla education. Um, and it really depends on the family. I mean, for example, I think games can be really powerful. So I've had families put Jeopardy boards together. Maybe the middle generation, we get the data from the senior gen, and mostly we ask the next gen to answer. But I've also made sure after I learned myself, to ask families what happens when we put teams together in your family and they compete with each other. Because if we, are going to hold grudges for the next 3 years, maybe not the most unifying experience at a family meeting. So like it really has to, like, the family voice is so critical here. What fits for your culture? And so I think do adhere to lots of breaks. If it's on video, keep it shorter. Uh, you know, Here's one of the most challenging things I navigate as an advisor. The non-family executive, and I'm going to pick on CFOs for a minute, that is a great source of truth and a really nice variety in voices because they've got specialized knowledge and we're not just hearing from mom and dad, like Wendy said, and they may be an excellent CFO. And sometimes it seems like that sort of precludes being a great teacher. That overlap doesn't happen real often. And so we've got a CFO who, has got the best of intentions and they spend twice as much time as we allotted them on the agenda, and they use 87 acronyms, and we've got eyes glazed over when we're done. I mean, that's one of the big parts of prep, is taking super care about advising and supporting those folks, not dictating, but ensuring that when they come to the table, they bring content that's accessible for everybody in the room and aims at probably that next as we think about building the most skills, we got to aim for that third gen, depending on their age, say their adolescence, to 30. And we've got to allow let's just say for now, the G2s and the G1s in the room to spend a little bit of time hearing a repeat, or, maybe learning a few less lessons. So we shoot to develop skills of the youngest generation. We get a set of voices in designing that. So ideally from all generations, if that's doable. We had a question in the chat about how do we get, married in energy and expertise in, available to building next gen talent. And I think having married ins, to the extent that they're willing and able to speak to those, a lot of time, like I've got a family right now that, we have a teacher as a married in. She's an amazing resource as we put family meetings together, because she understands curriculum and education and how long her teenagers can sit and what topics are going to be meaningful to them and when it's time to ask them what topics should be included. So I think a variety of voices in designing it, ensuring we spend plenty of time in prep, and then thinking about the three big buckets, policy or voice into guiding principles, pure education topics. Maybe that CFO comes in and, shares the financials for 20 minutes every single meeting. So we see it the same way every time and we get the reps. And then we have some fun together and we figure out, something that we can, equally engage all those generations in.
Yeah. CFOs get a bad rap because all of their training is around the financial performance of the business and they kill it. But what they don't realize when they come to work for a family company is that 50% of their job is going to be interacting with family members, mentoring, explaining things, and they're just at a disadvantage. That's just not a part of their training. And so, anyways, we put together a certificate in advising family enterprises at the Drucker School for that very purpose, really focused on CFOs, because if they can't humanize the process, it puts them in a pretty tough spot. So let's be kind to our CFOs, but
Yeah,
we do need to help them.
Yeah. Perfect.
So I want to just say right now, for those that are listening, I'm not going to hog all of Barb and Wendy's attention. I do want your voice to come in. So if you would please start to submit your questions in the chat. We'll leave the last 10 or 15 minutes if there are many questions in there. So please feel free to start submitting those in the chat. Wendy, I wanted to talk to you about now, let's move on to this 18 to 28-year-old age band. I have 3 kids in this age band, so this question is loaded, Wendy.
It is for me too, David. I have 2 kids in this stage too.
It's such an important time for them. They're making so many big decisions, where to go to school, who to spend time with, who to marry potentially. What are they going to do for their career? Like, this is crucial time. It's also a point where they're still individuating and pushing away from us.
Yes.
But also wanting to know that they're safe and they can come back.
Totally.
And so what are some of the considerations that are navigating with these 18 to 28-year-olds?
I agree with you 100%. I have 2 kids. I would have never guessed that this would have been the toughest stage from a parenting perspective. I really do think
it's supposed to be the funnest stage.
I know.
They're out. They're supposed to be friends now.
Exactly. No, I think that it is where life's crossroads happen. There's so many big decisions as you've just illuminated. I think that it really is about mentorship. I think but having them come to you, you've got to wait for those teachable moments or those moments where they come to you because they do want to be seen to be doing a fantastic job or they're capable and independent and adult. They want to be treated like an adult. And so I think that shift.
They don't always want to behave like adults.
No, they don't. They don't realize that though, David. It's like they'll say, treat me like an adult. And it's like, okay, under my breath.
Maybe don't come home at 2 a.m.
Act like one, right? But I mean, it's also a magical stage, right? I think that there's so much opportunity and it's, the 20s are one of my favorite stages because everything's black and white to them, and they know everything and there's so much energy and passion and excitement. I really do love the stage. I think that it is about mentorship and sponsorship. It's about helping them when they need that support, but not doing it as hey, I'm better than you, but hey, I'm coming to you with some thoughts around for you to consider, not you should do this, right? We need to move from that parent-child stage and way of behaving to that adult to adult because they really do want to be seen as adults. And so treating them with the dignity and the respect that you would for someone who's not part of your family, who's another individual. So I think that's part of it. I think getting them to also recognize that they can try on different roles and experiment, that they don't need, some kids, I have one kid who knows what he wants to do and he's on track and he's always had that goal. I have another son who's very flexible. He likes lots of different things. And so really getting him to try on and check out different things and see what might be interesting for you. And what might be a good fit for you that you feel like you could invest, lots of energy and time in. I think that the other piece is, I'm experiencing this with my youngest son who's working in our family business, is helping them integrate work and life. It's helping him understand. So he's what we call our bistro operations manager. and he's learning a lot. We have a winery, and so he's learning a lot about inventory and regulation, because there's so much regulation in the liquor industry, but also how to have a tasting room and a bistro, and integrating a lot of that. So helping him, so it's all the time. Like, you're on when the bistro is open, it's seasonal, but when it's open, you're on all the time, because you're constantly responding to reservations and group bookings and things like that, wedding requests, whatever it happens to be, and you're never off. And so I feel like for him, really helping him learn how to integrate life and work, but also create some boundaries. And again, not coming in and telling him you should do this and that, but really waiting until he's at a place where he wants some feedback and he wants some input, and helping him kind of talk through that, and sponsoring him in different ways. Hey, you want to take at one point he was really interested in film, and it's like, okay, well, let's go take a course. So I sponsored him to go take a course in that, to see whether he was interested in that. And so, it's a time of experiment. It's like this balance of experimentation. So it's that sponsoring the experimentation and mentoring some of the challenges and navigating some of those things that he's trying to work through, or they're working through at that stage, in terms of those big decisions you're talking about. When my son broke up with his longtime girlfriend, how to, navigate that and talk through that. But again, not imposing that, but waiting until they're ready to really have some conversation, and talking to them like they're adults. I think I'll just say one other piece. I think the other part is around this, especially in a family business, is using tools to help them think about what are their values, helping them form their identity. What is their purpose and their mission? And using some, like the Values Edge cards, Dennis Jaffe and his partners, those kind of tools help to make those things explicit and formalize them for them, and help them in that journey. I think, because it's a tough stage. It's a really tough stage to work through some of those big things.
Yeah. My one thing real quick, Barb, and then I'll come to you. One thing that I care about from 18 to 28 is have an ambitious pursuit. Just chase something.
Yeah.
Like,
Yes.
as long as they're chasing something that's not terrible.
Yes.
This is such a great time to learn where they're stuck. There's so many, though, that are stuck because they feel like they have to make the right decision.
Yes, right.
Well, if I do this, there's this fear of missing out on these 75 other opportunities. And so what I see is that 18 to 28, a lot of them are so hesitant to make a decision because they worry about things that they're going to have to leave behind if they make that choice. So I don't know, Barb, what would you add, or you had some thoughts?
Well, I was going to ask if chasing a girlfriend was included in your definition of an ambitious pursuit.
Well,
I may or may not have an example of that in one of my 3 18 to 28-year-olds. I think Wendy's description of sponsorship and mentorship, and in this stage, letting them come to you, that's when the advice is meaningful, is really very much enabled when you've built that, maybe even up until age 13, 14, like you kind of lose a lot of really credibility after that for this window, some range in your teenager's life. If you've built the expectation up until that age that there's this minimum level of involvement that we expect because of the honor or opportunity or responsibility of being associated with this enterprise, a beneficial owner or future potential owner, look, the family meeting's the family meeting, and we need you there once a year. If you can't do these other things, if you can't serve on a committee, if you don't want to design this, we get it. But here's the minimum, so that they understand. And we've got these other choices, and we can offer them these choices. And they may then have a very easy way to say, I'm rejecting these optional things that you've said is optional. And we're okay with that because we've said it's optional. And it gives them some latitude and choices. And minimum is here. If we wait until they're 18 or 20 or 25 to impose the minimum, that's it does not work nearly as well. We get a lot more pushback to that being the minimum, or any kind of minor expectations. So I think doesn't mean, Wendy and I've got in the book, what if we hadn't started yet? What's the section titled, Wendy?
Yeah.
What if we,
yeah.
Yeah, it's towards
If
the
you
end of
haven't.
each chapter. What if I hadn't done anything? And I'm starting when we're 40. Like it's okay. Like I'm not saying that there aren't things you can do there, but I think that's one of the beauties of really building this from the beginning.
Yeah. I think it's called Where to Start.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Well, we have a number of questions in the chat, so I'm going to
Okay.
turn to our audience here. And Dan McPherson had a question. Let's see. Lisa, did you get yours answered? Lisa, do you want to jump on? This is about married-ins.
Hi, yeah, Barbara and Wendy, thank you for sharing your time. And yeah, you touched on it, right? So to tap into that resource of married-ins who are part of this ecosystem, but not the owner-operators, that have this really powerful, potentially powerful role in shaping sort of the seedbed for a healthy ownership mindset, right? But a lot of families I find struggle with how and when to sort of bring them in and encourage them in these roles. So, yes, if you have a school teacher and she has a gift for pedagogy and teaching, that's one thing. But what if they don't have that? I think I was talking to Anne Black yesterday.
Yeah.
Webinar too. She's a colleague of mine, and we were talking about, at a family meeting, maybe when everybody gathers for one of the rooms, right, where a bunch of people are talking about like business focused things, having a workshop or something, a forum for the married-ins to have this dialogue about, their their roles in the successful transition of ownership was something that came to mind, but I was curious if there was anything else.
Yeah, I think that I love the idea of helping them have conversation about how their voice can be heard. I think that's really important and very respectful. I think that the first place is where are they engaged in the governance system, where is their voice heard? And I think that sometimes what ends up happening, sometimes families have family meetings, which are really ownership meetings, and spouses are not included there. So looking at your governance and making sure that there are opportunities for, when we call it a family, how are they defining family? And hopefully the spousal contingent is included in the definition of family, but helping them think through that. So I think starting with language, as we've been talking about, and having, if they only have family meetings and they don't have ownership meetings, they might want to have ownership and future ownership meetings, and then start having family meetings that are inclusive. And you can have spouses on the council, or having them involved in the planning. I have one family where the spouses are actually the directors on the family foundation. And they take the kids, this has just started in the last couple of years, but the kids are getting old enough where they're actually taking them to Backpack Buddies and to Habitats for Humanity and different places, again, not just giving money, but helping them foster the notion of philanthropy and charitable giving in the family. So I think it's about stepping back and saying, what do our structures look like? Where are we involving these really important people? Because their messages to the rising generation about the family business are critical. Their emotional connection, whether it can be, hey, the business is like a time magnet and it takes my partner away all the time. And so it can be a negative feeling. And we want to assess that. Like, how do we shift those and understand what those emotional spaces are right now? How do we help them have a voice, and where do they have a voice? And each family is going to be different in how they do that. But I think the question that you're asking, Lisa, is so important. Is let's step back and look at our system and see where we're involving the spousal contingent, and how do we do that better? It's all about engagement. I mean, all of what we're talking about is engaging so that people feel heard, they feel respected, they feel engaged in the appropriate places, that we have boundaries, but we don't have barriers. Easy to say and hard to do, but I love the question. It's an important one for families to consider.
Thank you, Lisa. I would just add one thing and then we'll go to our next question. It makes me crazy when there's a family that specifically excludes spouses and then wonders why the rising generation is not not coming back, is not interested. I mean, you can't exclude the story keeper and expect that there's going to be a good outcome. So I love what you said, Wendy. Language really matters. If it's an ownership meeting, call it an ownership meeting. Don't call it a family meeting.
Exactly.
Because if you call it a family meeting and you exclude people, then you're setting the wrong message, and you'll feel the implications of that for a long time.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that, Wendy. Let's go to Dan real quick here. Dan, do you want to come on and ask your question? Yours was regarding.
For sure, Wendy. So nice to see you. It takes me back to the FEA days.
Nice to see you too.
Yeah. And so I've been working with different financial advisors, introducing a lot of them to the 3-circle model, tools that they just haven't come across with their business owners. And I find I'm coming up a little bit short with what comes next once we've identified the different roles and go, okay, what do we do with this? So I've found a few resources on, once you've identified the circles, these are sort of the right tools for that circle. So whether it's a family mission statement in the family circle, maybe a USA right in the ownership circle, but just wondered if there were any resources that come to mind on what's the next step, right? Once we've identified the exercise and the players and how we put a bit more meat on the bone, I guess.
Sure. Do you want to start, Barb?
If you have an initial thought, Wendy, go ahead.
Sure. Oh my goodness. I mean, there's so many that I think are so unbelievably useful. I mean, the family enterprise model I find is, I don't know, Dan, if you're using that one, but it's where you're mapping out. So often we're focused on the business, especially because, it's the family, the business and ownership. When in fact, actually, the business is really only one asset that the family owns, and they may sell that. Are they still a family enterprise? And we would submit that they are. We would say that they are, even if they sell the OpCo. They have real estate assets, they have financial assets, they have heirloom assets, they have deferred assets, and they of course have human assets. So really thinking about, that's a wonderful tool to map out. So let me give you a quick example. I have a family that's Gen 2 to Gen 3. They're contemplating what assets they want to transition to the rising generation. In this particular scenario, they are not going to transition the business, but they are going to transition real estate assets and heirloom assets and the family foundation. And so, helping them think about that. So one of the real estate assets is a recreational property. And guess how much the operating costs are for that recreational property? Just take a guess.
I don't know, 50,000 a year.
$500,000.
Oh, okay, I was off.
So no. I mean, I'm just, it's just shocking, right? But the mapping out the family enterprise model helps them to then think about, okay, so what's the value of those assets? What's perhaps the income, for example, the real estate, what's the income producing? When you're thinking of transitioning your family recreational property, you better know what the operating assets are, or the operating costs, excuse me, of that particular entity, because the rising generation have to then take that on, and they have to cover those costs, or they have to figure out how those costs are going to be covered. What this family is actually thinking about doing is doing an endowment for the rising generation to help them cover some of those costs. But that helps map out. So that's one thing. Of course, the genogram is wonderful to help understand family history. The life stages model, I don't know if you've used that, but each of the 3 circles has a life stage cycle. But on top of that, we have the industry life cycle and we have the individual life cycle. One of my very, very favorite tools is called the enterprising family model. I know all these names are little, it's very jargony for our business, but that's a model. It's a 4-quadrant model, and it helps families think, instead of in the lower sort of left-hand side, you're really thinking business, and you're thinking management and operations of that business. When you get more strategic and you get more entrepreneurial, you go up into the upper right-hand corner, and you're actually thinking, I have a set of assets. How do I want to utilize those assets? very different mindset than, hey, I'm focused on business, but I have a set of assets, and what do we want to do with those assets? How do we grow them? Do we want to transition them, or do we want to sell them and have the rising generation use those assets in a very different way than we did in our generation? So again, I like tools that help shift people's mindset around what they own, how they're looking at it, and what the rising generation can do with what they have or what they're going to be given. So I don't know if those models help at all.
Yeah, very helpful.
I'm happy
Yeah,
to
yeah.
take it offline because there's a
Sure.
lot
Yeah,
I
I
could
probably
spend
will
a lot
too.
of time.
Thank you. That's great.
Yeah.
Dan, I would also say shoot me an email. We created a facilitator guide for the three circle model, which basically
Awesome.
has what are the sub questions that each of those groups have.
Very cool.
Seven. And if you know their questions, you likely will end up creating activities that they care about. Okay, we have time for one quick question. Danielle, would you like to come on and add your voice to the call?
Hi. Hello.
Hi.
See you all. I've been really connected with the frameworks of On It. I'm very honored to be learning with you today. And I just I just assume reading the book that I am valuable. Also, as owner, not in the operations. I belong to a family enterprise back in Brazil, where I came from, and I'm based in Michigan from some years now, as Barbara. And it was an agribusiness, now in real estate. And I am myself systemic psychology, and I am constant for families in business there, especially in the agribusiness. And I was very curious about especially the succession plannings, where I usually help them. Many of my clients from first to second generation, as we are a young country and we are just up to do these transitions, especially with women owning the business for the first time. It was not common there. So it's a huge complexity and not well structured process as we have here in US. So I'm learning a lot to help them back then. So my curiosity today is to know about you both. How do you use the systemic principles to approach conversations about section, especially two main things? If does your clients usually bring the subject to the table, or if you need to start this conversation and create conscious for them about it before starting this conversation? And
Danielle, we should probably just take one because we only have 1 minute.
okay, that's
and
fine.
We'll need to drop, but
Great, sure. Yeah.
Wendy or Barb, do you want to take that one on? Does your client usually bring the subject to the table, or do you need to create conscience about it before starting the conversation?
I think, because in the consulting seat, often they're bringing it to you. I think the challenge becomes sometimes it's only one or the other generation that really sees the need. And so you've got to help align folks around the urgency or the need for succession. And then I would say bucket wise, Danielle, it's, think about management or leadership transition and ownership transition as two separate and distinct but parallel processes. And it's much more helpful if we can help them have a plan for management transition first, or at least a little bit ahead of the curve, especially in this founder to G2, and then we move ownership. Because if we do it the other way, we're giving up control, and it tends to really create a boomerang senior gen who then gets really reluctant because they may have known it was the right thing to do, but they did not have capable managers, and they see that and then they grab back a hold, and we set the whole process back a lot of years.
Great. Thank you very much.
Thank you for your question, Danielle, and Barb. I think you did a great job on that. Our time has flown. We didn't cover nearly what we wanted to, but this has been a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate both of you, not only for coming on today, but doing the heavy lifting of putting this out in the world. I mean, I really appreciate it. Tell Gaia we said thanks to her as well.
Will do.
Really appreciate having us on, Dave.
Yeah, absolutely. Just some final housekeeping items before I let you go. June is going to be a big month for authors at Drucker. We're going to have two other authors come on, and I'll first interview David Wells. He's the president of Greycourt. Greycourt has $25 billion in assets under advisement, with around 50 clients. So we're talking about ultra high net worth families. We'll discuss his book, The Family Business Playbook, A Framework for Action. And that'll take place on June 17th. Then just 2 days later, this is crazy of me, but I'll be interviewing John Langston. He's the founder of Republic Capital Group. It's an industry-leading wealth and asset management investment banking firm, which is a different angle, which we've never covered on the show before. But since its founding in 2015, they have transacted 150 billion in client assets. And so he's going to bring a really interesting view. And he just wrote a book called 24% More. So we're going to be taking a different view. And so if you want to join me in June, it'll be a busy time, but I hope you're enjoying Authors at Drucker. And if there's authors you'd like to hear from and you haven't seen them on the show yet, shoot me an email with their names and I'll check out their books and take that into consideration. Again, thank you so much, everyone, for giving us your most precious asset, your time and your attention, and make it a great day.